Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Thank you for tuning in to YouTube, Google Play, and to iTunes. And we appreciate all the feedback from over 15 countries around the world. This man is one of my all-time favorite people. He is a legend in the business. He's called NFL, NBA, the Olympics, including track and field and figure skating, the premier events at the Summer and Winter Games, and as well as horse racing for many years on NBC. And he is a great friend, and he is Tom Hammond, who has graced us by coming to the bunker. Many people do not brave this to come in here face-to-face, Tom. Thank you.
I wouldn't call it gracing, Kenny. I did show up, and we'll see how it goes. You might be disappointed, but, we've been great friends for so long, and happy to be with you, and impressed that you've been viewed in so many countries. That's a big deal. So sounds like it's going well. And, by the way, no legend here. It's just that I've been around a long time. That's about all you could say.
Well, okay. You're too. The one knock I would have on my great friend Tom is he is too modest. I'll just say that. I'll leave it at that. But horse racing was your entree to the network scene with the 1984 Breeders' Cup, the inaugural Breeders' Cup, and it obviously took off to NFL and NBA and Notre Dame and everything from there.
It was. I was hired as one of maybe 12 reporters or something, because NBC had acquired the rights to the first Breeders' Cup, 1984, at Hollywood Park, and they'd never done a horse racing before, so they were scared to death. They said, we've got 4 hours to fill, and these races last 2 minutes each, so what are we going to do? So they hired a bunch of reporters, and I had met a lot of the producers and so on when they came to Lexington, and I worked at the NBC affiliate in Lexington, and I also became friends with Dick Enberg, who recommended me to NBC, and they hired me to work on that first Breeders' Cup. I was probably down at the bottom of the ladder because my beat was the backstretch, that I would cover stories from the backstretch that were interesting. And as the week progressed, I was there a whole week getting ready, and I sort of volunteered for things as I'd done all my career so far, and kind of gained their trust. And then as the day of the first Breeders' Cup unfolded, 2 or 3 things really happened that helped me out. One of them was that John Henry was not competing in the Classic. He was injured, but he still had a chance to be Horse of the Year, depending on what happened in the Classic. So on the backstretch there, I put up a television in front of his stall to say he'll be watching because he has a vested interest in it. And just before they came to me, someone, I don't know who, delivered a dozen roses to John Henry. And so I said, well, here, hand me those. So I'm holding the roses as they came to me and gave the story. And John Henry reaches his head out and begins to nibble those roses.
I remember.
Yeah, so it made a nice picture that they rolled in during the afternoon. Also, if you remember, Wild Again was in the Classic and 35-1 or something like that. And they had to put up, he was not a original nominee, they had to supplement him, and it cost us like $350,000 or something. And I said to the producer, John Gonzalez, I'd like to know why in the world they're running a horse that seemingly has no chance, putting up that much money to run. And Pete Axthelm, the late Pete Axthelm, was there, and he said, no, we can't do that story. We'll look like absolute idiots. The horse is vermin. So we went back and forth, and finally John Gonzalez said, all right, let's just do it. And so I went and talked to Bill Allen, who was one of the owners, and on the either side of Wild Again stall, and he told me that not only do we, mind putting up the money, we're going to bet more money on him because you think he's going to win. And between us, Wild Again began nodding his head like, yes. And, of course, as the Breeders' Cup Classic unfolded, that was another thing that happened to me that was fortuitous. I was supposed to be finished with my duties for the day, so I went from the backstretch around to the front to watch the first Breeders' Cup Classic. And if you'll remember, as the race happened, down the stretch, all hell broke loose with a Wild Again and Gate Dancer and Slew of Gold.
Slew of Gold, yeah.
And so the race is over. Wild Again has crossed the finish line first, but the inquiry sign is up there because there was all kinds of bumping and stuff. So I'm just standing there watching everything, and as the jockeys dismount, they go over to the phone to talk to the stewards and give their version of events. And after Pat Day, the writer of Wild Again, talks on the phone to the stewards, he walks over to me because I know him from Kentucky, and he just walks over to me to be interviewed. Well, I'm not supposed to be working, and I said to John Gonzalez, I've got Pat Day here. So I was able to interview him about the thing, and Wild Again was eventually confirmed as the winner. So as we signed off the air, that first Breeders' Cup, two things happened. John Gaines, whose idea was the Breeders' Cup to start with, came and gave me a big bear hug because he knew he had a winning idea. And the other thing that happened was Michael Weissman, who was the executive producer of NBC Sports, said, until this week, we didn't realize we had a broadcaster on our hands. Mm-hmm. And would you be interested in doing other things for NBC Sports, starting with NFL football? And 34 years later, still hanging around, or 35 years, whatever it is, still hanging around with NBC. And even though I've mostly retired, Kenny, I might come back to do the Tokyo Olympics next year. That has yet to be decided, but it's a possibility.
Well, and the Olympics, gosh, the track and field, I think that's probably as tough a thing to call as anything. Look, calling a horse race is tough. You've done that as well. And we know, two of the great guys, and Larry Colmus and Tom Durkin, our great friend.
Absolutely.
They're great. But, that track, you got that one shot, and you got like 9 seconds, and that's it. Now Usain Bolt, maybe that was a little easier. I don't know, because he just kind of Usain Bolt.
But you don't know.
But you don't know.
Yeah. I'd tell Larry Colmus that I need to get him in there and have him call a track race, a 100-meter dash, because the 100-meter dash, I think, is the toughest thing I do, because it's over in 9 seconds, and there's no margin for error, and there's no way to think about it. You just have to react, and you can't look. They're in numbered lanes, but if you look down to see what lane they're in, the race is over. So, and I tell Larry also that where he gets 10 minutes when the horses are on the track to memorize the colors, if he hasn't already. And track and field, you go right to it. You don't have a chance to see them in advance. They're right into we've come from some other event. Now they're getting into the starting blocks, and you just have to kind of know them. But I think calling the 100-meter dash with Usain Bolt is one of the highlights of my career. He never lost a race that I called at the Olympics. So I was proud of that. He was 9 for 9.
9, yeah.
And he was just otherworldly. He's from some other planet, because the guy 6'5" usually is just getting unwound by the time 100 meters is over.
Yeah.
And he just has an unbelievably lengthy stride, and loves to have fun. Now retired, he owns a bar in Kingston, Jamaica. Even though he went to Europe and to Asia and played some soccer. Always loved soccer, and he was playing. He played with a couple teams over there just for fun. But he was his antics and his performances were some of the highlights of my career. No question.
With all the sports, Tom, and with the NFL and the NBA, Notre Dame football, we're talking about the Olympics here, and then with the Triple Crown, is there one thing that kind of brings them all together? I guess a big moment is a big moment. Usain Bolt going to close out his career, going for another medal, perhaps American Pharaoh going for the Triple Crown, whatever that situation may be.
Yeah, there are big moments in all those places, and in an age of specialization, I've been lucky to be able to do all those different sports. Yeah. And when people ask me the highlights of my career, it's tough to pick. There were so many. But if you want to take the time to hear some stories, I'll give you my top 3.
I want to. That's why we don't get Tom Hammond every day on this show, so we're taking advantage of this.
Well, Michael Johnson at the Atlanta Olympics, becoming the first man to ever win both the 400 meters and the 200 meters in the same Olympics.
Right.
It was so exciting. And if you remember back to 1996, Kenny, he had golden shoes, and as he ran around he'd won the 400, and as he lines up for the 200, his golden shoes flashing as he ran the bend, as they call it, and the flash bulbs following him. And as he crossed the line, not only becoming the first man to win both those, but setting the world record in the process, I found that in calling the race, I began sitting, and when it was over, I was standing, didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
And so that was quite an adventure, and one of the top moments of my career. I was feeling so full of myself, Kenny, went back to the hotel and everybody patting you on the back and everything else. So I thought I was pretty hot stuff. So the next night, we're getting ready. It's maybe an hour before we're on the air. We're getting ready, and I look up into the stands, and somebody's waving me up there. And I look again, and it's former President Jimmy Carter.
Wow.
So I said, wow, this is great. Former president is going to give me a compliment.
Yeah.
So I walked up there, and he said, hey, can you move that camera? It's blocking my view. So
it's a tough business, isn't it?
So the hot stuff didn't last too long. Then I guess and you already mentioned, I guess, one of the other great moments, if I give you three, in the middle here would be American Pharoah. I had seen affirmed an Alydar in person, standing next to my friend Chick Anderson, who called the race at Belmont Park and on CBS. And 37 years later, after several close calls, I'm wondering if I'm ever going to see a Triple Crown again, much less broadcast one.
Right.
And along comes American Pharoah, and you remember the scene. You were right in the middle of it, and you were with Bob Baffert, so you were at the epicenter of it.
Yeah.
But as they rounded the turn and came for home, when it became obvious he was going to win, the place went crazy. Now, Kenny, I've been in lots of big stadiums all over the world.
Yeah.
The Big House, the Neyland Stadium, just all of them that hold over 100,000. And the attendance that day, as you know, capped at 90,000 at Belmont Park. But I've never heard a louder crowd, more raucous crowd. The din was just enormous. It was deafening. And people standing on chairs and tables and holding their cameras, their phones above their head to take the video. And it was just a scene that I'll never forget. And then I thought Victor Espinoza, the winning jockey, did a brilliant thing. And when they came back, instead of going right into the winner's circle, he took the horse all the length of that enormous grandstand at Belmont Park to let everybody have a good look at him.
Yeah.
And that was quite a moment I'll never forget. And then I think the best moment, and again, I apologize for these long stories.
No, I love these. That's why we do a show like this, seriously.
The best moment, I think, was at the 2000 Olympics. Kathy Freeman, an Aboriginal Australian, had in Atlanta 4 years earlier finished second in the women's 400 meters. And so now as the Olympics come to her home country, the pressure building on her is just enormous. And just a little history, the very first time that the women's 400 was contested at the Olympics, it was won by an Australian. So there's a little history there too. So for 4 years, the pressure has mounted on her because they're going to run in her home country, and can she win the 400 meters? She would be the first Aboriginal person to ever win an Olympic event.
Right.
So just to add to the pressure, at the opening ceremony at Olympic Stadium, she has the great honor of being chosen to light the Olympic flame to get the Sydney Olympics underway. And so, wow, can you just imagine? And so time for the race. She is into the blocks, and the race is getting ready to start. And I said that Kathy Freeman has waited 4 years for this moment. Australians have waited 40 years, and her Aboriginal people have waited forever. And as the race began, came into the turn for home, and there's no way she's going to win. It's going to be the huge disappointment of all these fans that came out to see her run, and millions watching on television. And somehow, in that last 100 meters, she wills herself to victory.
Yeah.
Still don't know how she did it. Her form was awful. She was flopping all over the place.
I remember that.
But somehow she willed herself to victory, much as Affirmed had done against Alydar, actually, in the horse racing genre. But she finally crosses the finish line to win the race with 120,000 in Olympic Stadium going crazy. And 2 steps past the finish line, she just collapses to the track, not only with the effort of winning the race, but with the pressure of the world lifted from her shoulders.
Yeah.
It was such a moment. That's why I say it's my best moment ever, just because of all the drama involved and what the stakes being so high for Kathy Freeman and for all of Australia. So that I think is my best moment.
And I remember that moment well. And I also remember at these Olympic seminars, and I've done a few Olympics, not nearly as much as a dozen or so you've done, but they always play Tom. It's like the Tom Hammond highlight reel of things to say and not to say, and to let a moment play out like you did when Freeman won and like you did when American Pharoah, that sometimes silence is golden. Just to let that moment play out after you've so beautifully set the scene of what was at stake, and then you see what happens. That's what I love about it.
Well, yeah, I think laying out is a big part of being a good sportscaster, and unfortunately, not too many realize that now. I think they feel like they've got to call attention to themselves because there's 200 channels to watch or something.
Right.
But yeah, they feel like they've got to talk all the time. My philosophy is, if there's a big moment like that, like American Pharaoh becoming the first Triple Crown winner in 37 years, the place going crazy, I can only detract from that feeling. Yeah. I think it's best to let the director get those shots and just cut those shots. That tells the story better than some banal phrase I could come up with. Right. So I think sometimes the best thing you can do is say nothing, and that was one of those moments. Drew Esikoff, the director, is one of the best in the business, maybe the best sports director there is. And his shots were brilliant. I mean, he told the story and the excitement of the crowd with all those pictures. And so, finally when I talked after a long, long time, I don't know how long it was, but a long time, and I just said simply, he did it.
Yeah.
Because that was what everybody was wanting to watch to see. I mean, and people stopped in airports and every place else to see if finally we could have a Triple Crown winner after 37 years. So it was quite a moment. And thank you for the compliment, because I think being able to lay out is often the best thing you can do.
It was wonderful to be there and just take that in and see everybody wanting to touch Baffert. People just wanted to just touch him. I'm there and I'm just laying out a camera range and waiting until it happened. I remember before the race I thought, hey, this could be a moment here. Bob looks over at me, and I'm probably 6-8 feet away from him behind the camera, and his son Bodie and his wife Jill there. And he goes, Kenny. And so I'm thinking he's going to give me a Joe Namath moment. He's going to guarantee victory or something. I'm going to relay it to you, or maybe they'll come to me. I'll say, Tom, he just guaranteed victory or something. And instead, remember they had Burger King, this big Burger King's behind him. He goes, hey, Kenny, did you ever think you'd see this at the Triple Crown? And this is like 2 minutes before the race. And I thought at that time, he's going to win this thing, because suddenly Bob seemed pretty loose.
Yeah, he did.
He acknowledged Burger King guy there and had some fun with it.
Yeah, they had the king there, the guy who dresses up in that costume. And I think they made a donation to Bob's favorite charity of $250,000 or something for the right to have him there and see that. But I mean, you're right in the middle of that. I mean, like I say, you're at the center of the storm, and I'm sure Bob considers you his good luck charm now.
Well, so far so good. I got a couple of those Triple Crowns now, and I love the stories, like when we would walk at Belmont in the mornings. When you and I, Mike Battaglia, Donna Wood sometimes with us, we'd see Shug McGahee or some other Kentuckians, and just the stories you tell about when you were living up there and working. I think people in the business know. I'm not sure how many people in the horse business know. I'm not sure how many people know that you actually have worked as a groom, and you've walked hots. You've actually worked in horse racing as well as brilliantly covered it.
My summer vacations in college were at Belmont and Saratoga, working for Hall of Fame trainer Cheryl Ward, John Ward's uncle.
Yeah.
And being just down there in the middle of it as a hot walker, then graduated to groom. So that was quite an experience, but it is a background. And I did live at Belmont Park. I lived in a cottage right there on the back stretch. And the other half of the cottage, Cheryl Ward lived, and some of my best memories are after the races. And most of the time I was up there, they weren't racing at Belmont Park because they were rebuilding the grandstand. So they had to van them across, even though they were stable there, they van them across down to Aqueduct, where they ran. But I can remember that after the races on Saturdays, sometimes Cheryl Ward would have Woody Stevens and Max Hirsch in his cottage there as they drank scotch. They'd let me come in and listen to the stories. I never said a word for 3 hours, but I enjoyed the stories, that's for sure.
I love the stories of that. One of my favorite is, and I told Shug that again last summer. I saw him up at Saratoga. I don't know, you remember the time that you, Mike, and I are standing there, and I guess we must have had a wandering look of what barn we were going to or something, and Shug's across the street and said, bus just come in?
Yeah, right.
I guess we look like we just walked into town, because that's a big backside. Anybody's ever been on Belmont, it's not easy to figure out where everybody is over there. But there's some about backside and just being there in the mornings and all that I think really is special to horse racing. That I don't know, Tom, is there anything else in sports that compare to it?
I don't think so.
That
People
kind of moment
that are able to experience that, they think it's the greatest. And look what's happened at Churchill Downs before the Derby, the backstretch now is the second biggest city in Kentucky. The way that so many people want to come and experience just what you said, to be there in the morning and see the horses and to hear the stories and to just take it all in.
Yeah, it is. It's something else. And you've been a mentor to so many of us over the years about the storytelling, and I love the stories. That's what brought me into horse racing. When I first came to Lexington, I'm kind of learning the ropes a little bit. You were always generous with your time, but it's I don't know of any sport that has as many layers to it with owners, trainers, breeders, jockeys.
Right, I agree.
Whatever you want to get into.
Next to the Olympics, I think the greatest stories are in horse racing. And so actually that, I learned, one of my mentors was Dick Enberg.
Oh, yeah.
And I learned storytelling from him. When I grew up, Kenny, with the Claude Sullivans and the Kaywood Ledfords, the play-by-play man,
right,
just basically gave the nuts and bolts of the action. And I guess that's the way I started too. That's what I'd heard of my whole life. When Dick Ebersol took over at NBC Sports, he insisted that his play-by-play men and women become storytellers.
Yeah.
And so that's how, I learned to be a storyteller, and it came pretty naturally to me. And so I've always, I'm killing you today with all these stories, but
that's what I think. Hey, I'm a little patting on the back here, but I think that's what racing needs is a few more things like that. Tell some stories, learn the individuals, root for the individuals some, and get to know their stories a little bit. Because sadly, no matter how great Justify is with the breeding so rich out there, they're not going to be around more than a year. And it's nice to be able to root for or against a Baffert or a Pletcher, just like you'd root for or against a coach or a team, in my opinion.
And I love the history of horse racing.
Yeah.
It's such a rich history, and nowadays there's no time to tell any of the history. There's just, it's too bang, 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 and I felt like maybe I just became a traffic cop most of the time. But there's so much to tell. I can remember sometimes if there was a delay for whatever reason, to be able to reach back and tell some of those stories was good, because the history of thoroughbred racing in America is tremendous.
From watching the Triple Crown this year, did you ever think you were going to see a Derby where the winner was taken down on the track? This has been a crazy year.
It has been. I guess it was inevitable because times have changed.
Right.
And there's no question that sometimes they look the other way in the Derby.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was the Derby. But in this day and age, with horse racing under the microscope that it is now, I think you just could not afford to look the other way, and the incident could have been catastrophe. Yeah. If War of Will clips heels and goes down in the middle of that pack of 10 or 12 horses,
right?
It could have been just a disaster. So I think that you had to sort of send a message, and you had to say that this is a foul no matter what day or what race it's in, and take him down. So, a lot of people, I think, didn't understand, because he really didn't interfere much with Country House, who winds up being made the winner. But if you commit a foul, you have to go back behind the horse that you fouled, and that put him, 17th maximum security. So a lot of people didn't understand why that was. That they thought that he had to foul the horse that wins in order for that horse to be acclaimed the winner. But tough decision for Barbara Borden and the stewards. Yeah. I thought they probably should have answered questions so they could explain their decision, and they didn't. But I thought ultimately they made the correct decision.
Santa Anita, and I don't want to. We're not going to end this on a downer, but like Santa Anita, it's going to be the cloud the whole year, I think, on horse racing. I talked about earlier at the start of the show is maybe just a little more transparent, just a little more of an explanation, not a battering of things, not a why didn't you do this, don't you regret this, but just a little more of an explanation about some of the things that have gone on without convoluting things with race day medication and whips and things that may take away from the real problem of the track.
And here's an interesting thing, Kenny. As you know, the Breeders' Cup is scheduled to go to Santa Anita.
Yeah.
Do they keep it at Santa Anita?
I know that's.
Or do they try to move it to Churchill Downs or someplace else? It's really a serious deal. In California, it's a possibility the racing could be banned. It's not likely, but it's possible. And it's also possible that the question could go on the ballot for the voters of California to decide whether there should be any racing or not.
Yeah.
So I think the protocols that they put into place to try to, as we know, racing has always had the same problem: no central authority,
right?
Different medication rules in every state. I've fallen into the camp now where say let's just do like the rest of the world and let's go with, hay, oats, and water. No race day medication.
Yeah.
Interesting too about the whip that John Velasquez at Royal Ascot suspended because of his use of the whip. And I don't. We're used to it here,
right? And
the jockeys say you need it to make sure that they run straight. But as I said to Mike Battaglia the other day, it's a public relations nightmare. Nobody wants to see horses being whipped, and so even though I don't think it really hurts them, it more pops and more startles them more than anything else. Right. But I said to Mike, it's time just to ban all the whips. Yeah. If everybody runs without them, we're all on the same page.
That's right.
Let's just ban them all, and they haven't even done that in Europe, so that's a drastic move, I guess. But I think we need to fall in line generally, especially on medication, with the rest of the world.
The moment, did you have a horse that is your favorite horse? Which may or may not be. I had somebody that, and they said, well, of course it's got to be Secretary. I said, well, sometimes I got favorite players that wouldn't necessarily be Michael Jordan or LeBron James. It's guys that you just like for a reason, or you like the way they play. Swell, for whatever reason, was one of my favorite. My dad, one of the few times we ever went to the track together at Keeneland, we saw Swell run. And with all that, maybe so Swell is one of my favorite horses of all time. And of course American Pharaoh, obviously, because of what he did, but
and because he's like a puppy dog.
He's like my old golden retriever. I remember Bob Baffert was nice as you went over, and everybody, he asked me, he said, everybody's been over NBC, but you and two people coming, and it was the week of Keeneland. The breeder's going for the Grand Slam.
Right.
And I went over, and he was, he's like, I've got a picture, he's on my shoulder, and I'm patting him, it's like having a big dog. So yeah, he's one of my all-time favorites.
Personal Ensign, I think. Her race in the Breeders' Cup Distaff at Churchill Downs, 1988, was either affirmed in Alydar in the Belmont Stakes or Personal Ensign in that Distaff in 1988 are what I think are my most exciting races. If you remember, Personal Ensign was undefeated, trying to be the last major undefeated horse since the 1800s or something, and this was her last race. But also in the race was Winning Colors, who in the spring had won the Kentucky Derby there at Churchill Downs. And again, like Kathy Freeman, when they got to a 16th of a mile from home, there's no way Personal Ensign can win, and somehow she did. So she was one of my favorites. Northern Dancer was one of my favorites because I saw him win the Bluegrass Stakes at Keeneland and said, well, I've got to go to the Derby. So that was my first Derby. And then after he won the Derby, won the Preakness, I said, I'm going to go see if he can win the Triple Crown. So I went to New York, stayed with Doug Flynn, our friend, playing for the Mets, and I remember at that Belmont Stakes where he was denied the Triple Crown, but I can remember, and it was run at Aqueduct because Belmont was closed.
Oh, that's right.
And I can remember looking down on the paddock and seeing Chris Schenkel on television, and he had what looked like one of those old programs in his hand, and inside was a script. So I was fascinated by that, never dreaming that one day I would be broadcasting the Triple Crown myself. And just to complete the list of favorite horses, I owned one with Norman Cassie, the father of Mark Cassie, who trained it. It's one of the first ones that he trained. He couldn't have been much more than a teenager. I guess he was out of high school. But he was Bigger Than Big was his name, and he was a huge horse, and he ran at the same speed all the time, one paced. But he would run forever at that same speed. So we entered him in a distance series they had at Churchill Downs where they went 1.25 miles, 1.5 miles, and 2 miles, which was the last race of the last day. And he had won the 1.25 miles, and he won the 1.5 miles, and here in the 2 miles, here he comes. Same pace. He's always been running the entire race while the rest of them are getting so tired, and that was so exciting to see him run. And actually, that was the last race run in the old paddock at Churchill Downs, where 11 Triple Crown winners had been saddled, and they gave me the number that had been over his stall when he was saddled as the last race in that paddock. So those are my favorite horses. So 2 of them you've heard of, and 1 of them you probably haven't.
Oh, I love it. Tom, thank you so much for being with me.
My pleasure, Kenny.
Such an honor to have a great friend, a great broadcaster, and just one of the best guys around. Tom Hammond with us. More coming up when we come back right here on this, the Horse Racing Show.